Welcome back, everybody, for a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. If this is your first time watching us tonight, we welcome you to the show. For those who have been with us from day 1, day 20, day 30, whenever you started with us, please make sure you let people know what you love about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You could also subscribe to Spotify, Anchor, and all streaming platforms. Now, before we introduce our guest tonight, I want to do a few housekeeping items here before we get started. So the first thing is, during our hiatus from the podcast, we've been doing a lot of work at Identity Talk to try to continue to bring quality content to all educators in the nation beyond. And we went ahead and launched our virtual school, which is now open for enrollment. And to tell you a little bit about some of the offerings that we have the Shape of the Teacher Identity 101 program, which is for any K-12 teachers who are looking to define their teacher identities. And some of the topics we cover include culturally responsive teaching, anti-racist practices, techniques and tools for teaching, such as classroom management, family and parent engagement, lesson planning, among others. And this is an opportunity for folks who are looking to get continuing education credits or professional development points to add towards a license to enroll. So if you're looking for those opportunities, make sure you reach out to us at kindly.com/identitytalk4educators. We love to talk to you to learn more about your journey as you continue to perfect your craft in the education field. We also have another course for any teachers or non-educators who are looking to self-publish a book and to learn the process from beginning to end. So if you're in that situation and you want to get more information about the SPELL course, which stands for the Self-Publishing Educators Learning Lab, make sure that you reach out to us at that same URL, kindly.com/identitytalkforeducators. Book a call with us and we'll be happy to give you more information about the program. And then also we have some swag, some hoodies, some t-shirts, and other accessories that you can wear while you're virtual with your students. And that is at our Identity Talk apparel shop, which you can find at the Teespring store or on Facebook. And you can see the URL there. So we're at teespring.com/stores/the Identity Talk apparel shop. So make sure you check us out for our latest designs and accessories. So now that we have that taken care of, I want to go ahead and introduce our special guest tonight. So we have here an educator, poet, spoken word artist, social justice advocate, and she is here to talk to us about her book, Black Appetite, White Food. And we're going to get right in to this conversation. I'm just so excited. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome a professor of social justice education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Dr. Jamila Lyiscott.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm just really excited to be having this conversation and just really grateful for the work that you've been doing in the world. Very necessary, especially in this moment.
Thank you. I'm humbled and honored. So much to talk about,
Yeah.
So before we get into the book, I want to give you an opportunity to share with us about what brought you into education. So I know you rep in Brooklyn through and through.
Yes, BK all day.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance to just share about your upbringing and what brought you to, where you are today in education.
Yeah, along with being from Brooklyn, my family's Trinity to the bone, and And I grew up in a Caribbean American community, and just navigating the brilliance, the beauty, and the genius of my community became a really powerful space of learning for me. And what I realized is, as I was navigating school spaces in my upbringing, as well as community spaces, like I was a part of youth resistance communities, youth art communities. And as I was navigating these spaces, I realized that there was a disconnect between what was being valued in schools and what was being valued, affirmed, and celebrated in my communities. What I valued as beautiful in my Black church, in my Caribbean American, loud, robust and full of color community, I realized that the markers of success that we traditionally have in school didn't really represent or reflect that well. Particularly when I joined a youth organization called Urban Word NYC, Brotherhood Sister Soul, other spaces where young people in out of school contexts were being invited to question their world. And we were being taught and told that our voices mattered to the shaping of reality. That's just not the kind of invitation that I ever experienced at school. And simultaneously, what I was experiencing was witnessing the way that my peers in those contexts were thriving, where I looked up to folks who were so successful in their approach to hip hop and spoken word and other like cultural practices that we value. Like, they were fire, right?
Right.
And they were so fire that when there were opportunities for us to, present on Broadway or in the Apollo Theater or in Madison Square Garden, it was just like, wow, like we had these platforms, my peers had these platforms, and a lot of my peers were simultaneously being tracked into either special education programs or alternative programs in school, or just failing. And I'm like, nah, there's a disconnect, because there's something about the genius of us that's being captured here that's not being captured in schools. And so those experiences led me to explore more about the relationship between educational justice and social justice broadly.
No, absolutely. And I want to know from you, at what age did you catch the poetry bug? Because I know you've been writing poetry and doing spoken word for a while. So when did you fall in love with poetry?
You know what's weird? Like, I probably since I was like 10, I probably took my first stab at writing a poem when I was 10, and I presented it in a school assembly.
Okay.
And it was one of the first times that I felt like this collective sense of affirmation that there was something about the resonance of my voice that was valuable. And I paid attention to that. But it wasn't until I was 15, actually, that my English teacher gave me a flyer for a teen spoken word slam. And I'm like, all right, what's this? She said, you might like this. I went, I tried out, and I was, I made it to the next round, and I joined this community of youth poets and young people who were in this powerful resistance community, thinking about what it meant for us to transform the world. And so that's how the poetry came to life. Like, it was live, for real.
No, and that's what poetry does. It just gives us that opportunity to be in a space where we feel like ourselves and it's authentic to us, and maybe not to others who don't understand what that space is and what it means.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to translate yourself the way that I had to translate myself in order to succeed in school. People talk about code switching a lot, right? You got to code switch in order to succeed in certain educational environments. That wasn't a requirement at the door, right? You don't got to take off a part of yourself and try something else on, right? You had this autonomy over your authorship, right?
Yeah.
And that was again a powerful invitation. I love the idea of the spaces that we're fully invited to.
Yes, I want to stay on that for a second, because I know in the book you talk about the importance of celebrating the linguistic brilliance and versatility of Black and brown children. So I know you did a piece called 3 Ways to Speak English.
Yes.
Just a fire piece.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how many times I've watched it myself.
Thank you.
And it just speaks to just the importance of affirming just the cultures of Black and brown people, because we're not monolithic.
Nope.
You know, my wife, she's also from the Caribbean. She has a father who came from Barbados, and her mother is Panamanian. So there's some parallels there. But I wanted to know from you, how can we get more teachers to affirm and celebrate the linguistic brilliance and versatility of Black and brown children in the classroom, and to get them to see that this is something that can be useful in academia?
Right. You know, that's a complex question. So there's levels to it, right?
Yes.
On the one hand, I'm thinking about what it means for us to truly fall in love with ourselves and our communities, right?
Right.
What does it mean for us to actually believe? A lot of teachers that don't come from Black and brown communities enter into Black and brown educational context believing that young people need to be saved from themselves and saved from their communities, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the dominant messages about like some of the hoods that I grew up in is like, how are you going to get up out the hood? And it's almost like I realized there's this parallel. In the same way that you asked me to escape my hood, you've asked me to escape myself. And so you've asked me to escape my voice. You've asked me to escape my identity in order to latch on to some other thing outside of me that you say is valuable. Now, if we look beneath that, what's really the messaging is that who I am, where I'm from, where I'm grounded, what I am is not valuable. So what does it mean for us to truly believe that the contributions, heritages, histories, cultural practices, languages, identities, interests, and voice of Black and brown youth are fundamentally valuable? Mm-hmm. Outside of the validation and scope of schooling, outside of the dominant cultural narratives that say you're valid because X, right? So this linguistic practice is valid because it can advance you toward college and career readiness, right? Which is false. Right. So there's that side of it where I think it's really important for us to interrogate our own conditioning and make sure that we are in love with who we are, and that the people who are within our communities, whether they're from these communities or not, understand that what's here is valuable in and of itself. And so it's not something to be erased or switched out or to be obliterated in the service of something else. At the same time, we have, like, I think especially in this social moment where so many intersectional injustices are rearing their ugly head in overt ways, right? So we understand white supremacy is real. It's not just some subtle thing from the past. It's like real, and it's out here these days. Yeah. A lot more educators are like, yo, we got work to do, and passionately desire to engage in change. But our institutions now, if our institutions are not equipped for that change, it's not going to be sustainable. So I often ask about, like, you know, folks, you know, you got an iPhone. If you have an old iPhone and you try to update new software, it's not going to work. It's going to get glitchy. So even when we have folks who are trying to think about what does it mean for us to divest from white supremacist logic, colonial logics, and really think about what it means to validate and affirm and transform our institutions in the service of racial equity, our institutions are still beholden to that. And so the curriculum reflects that, the standards, the requirements. And if we don't have institutions that are ready to center and affirm and value what Black and brown young people bring into the room, even with our best efforts and desires, it's not going to be sustainable. I still believe that we gotta still do the work to be disruptive, like in real time, you know, make sure that as to the best of our abilities, we're doing the work in our classrooms, but there are layers to the way that we make this transformation and not just some kind of dealing with the symptom, right? So there's a difference between reformation and transformation.
Yes. And I want to talk about accountability for a second, because as everybody knows, we have a new administration coming in. People are optimistic about the possibilities as it
Mm.
pertains to our education system. You know, we have a first lady who is an educator,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a chance to bring in a new secretary of education.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some optimism going on. But, you know, at the same time, we still have to be vigilant, like you said, in terms of making sure that people are accountable. So what I want to know from you is, what are some steps that school leaders and teachers can take to ensure that we are being held accountable, to ensure that schools are being accountable for implementing equitable practices, culturally responsive and sustaining practices in their schools with fidelity?
Right. I mean, well, first, just going back to the socio-political moment, there's some optimism, but this is complex, right? Because even before the Trump administration, we were not necessarily moving into the most exciting direction as a country, right? We weren't doing this work so well. Even with the current administration, the incoming administration, there's a lot of labor and work to be done. And so we know that. So what I will say in terms of like the steps that we need to take is that we need to make sure that, again, I can't emphasize enough the way that our institutions need to be held accountable, right? Our institutions need to have in the budget, in the practices, in the standards, in the norms that we envision and that we dream of, they need to be invested in the true aims of equity and culturally sustaining pedagogies that we care about. So it's one thing to articulate it, and we make these announcements, we make these proclamations about what needs to happen, but the action steps, I believe that teachers need to be mobilizing, and teachers are, like right now, teachers are with everything that's happening, still mobilizing around holding educational leaders accountable for creating pathways towards making sure that they're equipped with the tools for doing this. But then we also have to think about the standardized testing. Like this is what I mean when I say, if we don't divest from the very systems that we say we're up against, we can't play both sides. So we cannot prepare our students for a standardized test that erases them, and then say that we are affirming their identities. Right? Because we're telling them at the same time, out of one side of our mouths, we're like, oh, this test is going to advance you toward, again, college and career readiness. And out the other side of our mouth, we're like, oh yeah, but you matter. You may not be reflected here, but you matter. And so, we have to mobilize and think about the various stakeholders that are involved in making sure that these standardized testing and the kind of harm that they cause is changed. That the way that our schools are so complicit with carcerality, right?
Mm-hmm.
The punitive practices, the mirroring in Black and brown poor communities specifically, the kind of parallel between what's happening in our prisons and what's happening in our schools is scary, right? Again, if we don't take ourselves out of that kind of logic at the institutional level, even the efforts of individual teachers will not be sustainable. And so for me, those are big ones. Pulling out of the standards that are rooted in white supremacist values, and pulling out in the standards that are connected, that are rooted in carcerality and capitalism. Like these are all ideological models that frame our logic, right? And there's a lot to say about that. But I just really believe that if we're going to be doing the work, at the same time as we get equipped with the tools and the practices and the professional development and the reading groups, the common reads, all of that, how are we transforming our institutions? The same way that we're going to hit these streets and protests, but how are we changing legislation? If we don't change legislation, we don't change this country, right? If we don't change the way that our system works, we don't change this country. So we could protest as much as we want, right? So there are parallels there.
This is the second time this week someone has mentioned standardized test.
Yeah.
Dr. Gholdy Muhammad, who was on the show this past Monday, mentioned the importance of getting rid of the standardized test and making it more reflective of the cultures of the different kids who take these tests, but also just acknowledging the fact that there's still bias to this day. The
Right.
cultural bias is still there. And what's amazing is we hear so much talk about differentiating instruction,
Mm.
but our standardized tests don't differentiate culture.
Right.
You
Exactly.
know what I mean?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying about the disconnect. Out of one side of our mouth, we're just like, you matter, but you're going to take this test that doesn't reflect who you are. So we're standardizing white supremacy. That's
Yes.
all we've done. Right. And if we're going to keep standardizing white supremacy, how are we going to be culturally sustaining? How are we going to be culturally responsive toward the goal of meeting the standard of white supremacy so that you can get the job, so that you can get, so that you can be prepared for a world that, first of all, is so diverse that it really requires you to exist in your beautiful, rich cultural self in the first place. So there's a mismatch. It's a game that's not even working right. You know what I mean? Yeah.
No, absolutely. So I want to talk about white privilege for a second. Now, in your book, you have a chapter which is based off of a poem you wrote called Why Did All the Black Students Boycott My Classroom? And when I read that chapter, I couldn't help but think about all the different times where I let my black and brown students down in my own classrooms because I was either too afraid to speak up for them.
Yeah.
And I was afraid of the consequences that would come as a result of me speaking up, even though I knew that what I was saying was the right thing. Like I was too scared to say anything, but at the same time, I was perpetuating this power structure that exists, within our schools. So I want to know from you, in what ways do we as Black educators subconsciously center white privilege in our own work?
Yo, that's the T right there, right? Mm-hmm. That is like, for me, one of the most painful experiences I've had is noticing and witnessing myself, that self-awareness that I was engaged in that practice in the very world where I endeavor to be a space of refuge and celebration with fellow Black students in particular, to know that I have been complicit with marginalizing who they are, right, in the classroom space, because I have been conditioned to center whiteness. And so some of the ways that we do that, I'm going to go back to the election, is kind of connected to what are we doing right now. Right now, we got a lot of dialogue going on in the public sphere that's critiquing the Black Lives Matter movement, that's critiquing the defund the police slogan, as a way to say that the Black and brown communities that have showed up in so many ways within this election are actually, the needs and wants that happen in these communities are too radical for this country in this moment. And in a lot of ways, the logic that pushes us to say we cannot be too radical, we cannot be too extreme about what we need, is a way to appease whiteness, right? Is a way to say, oh, well, this might be a little bit too much for the delicate balance of what it means to not disrupt the system of white colonial logics that we exist within today. I say that on the socio-political front because it's similar to what plays out in the classroom, where we are constantly navigating the push and pull of what it means to protect or be in solidarity with Black students, but then have to play to the typical white-centered ethos of the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. So when I'm in an interracial classroom environment, I'm in this push and pull where I'm like, okay, I either make the white people in this space deeply uncomfortable and stand in solidarity. These are in certain moments with the Black students who are here needing that affirmation because they've been starved of it for so long, or I do the opposite, right? And so what does it mean for us to think about what it means to play into the hands of white comfort? I know that what it looks like for me is the historical memory of knowing that making sure that white people are comfortable has been a mode of survival for my people for generations. And I've been guilty of it. I've done it. right? And for me, what happened in the moment that I was reflecting on in the book was really, it was more of like a frozen moment. Like I didn't even consciously realize that I was letting certain comments slide because I didn't know how to, in real time, call out the issues that were causing harm to the Black students in the classroom because it would cause discomfort for the white students. And I felt tremendous guilt after that I had to navigate. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But again, I'm in this social moment like, listen, I want us to understand as a people, not just in the classroom, but in the socio-political sphere, that we cannot be so busy protecting whiteness that it happens at the expense of what our most vulnerable contexts need. Right. And I hope that parallel makes sense. I hope it's not too like confusing.
No. I totally get it. And as you were talking, I just think about some of the policies that are in our schools that are just so inherently racist, but yet we still have them in our schools. Like think about uniform policies, right? Hoodies.
Oh,
hoodie. Like,
let me tell you. No, here we go. Okay, so this is perfect.
Yep.
So I have a friend who was at the district level trying to advocate for his students, who wanted to advocate with his students. I apologize, not for, with his students around the do-rag policies in their schools, right? Because they understood that the do-rags were being punished in a punitive way, in ways that regular baseball caps that were being worn by white students were not. And so we know who wears do-rags, right? Now they get to the district level and they're talking about what needs to happen to revise the policies. The Black leadership at the district level is pushing back and saying, nah, you know, we can't, we want them to adhere to the dress code, which are clearly racist, right?
Right.
So my friend like is heartbroken, crushed. Like, is this some kind of respectability politics? Like, what's really good? Like, why are we knowing that the dress codes and the policies here are very racist and we don't want to move against it? And come to find out that those Black leaders, those older Black leaders are like, listen, when our young people have on do-rags, it makes them appear more dangerous to other people, right? It positions them as a target potentially. And so it was almost like this push and pull between like, how do we navigate the safety of these young people? Because if they are read as too Black or too brown in a particular moment, it could cost them their lives. But then the emotional safety that was occurring in the everyday life of school was also at stake because they felt themselves being policed for their cultural practice of wearing do-rags for their hair. And that's the tension of being in spaces that are so steeped in white supremacy that your very life, your psychological and emotional wellness are often in a dance with your physical wellness, how we're going to be punished in either way. And so there are multiple levels of harm that play out.
No, there are. And just thinking back to what some of my colleagues have said in the past about the policies, right? I just find it amazing how we can punish a student for wearing their hoodie. And it could be for the simple fact that they just didn't, that they haven't had a haircut in a while, or they're going through something at home. But then you go down the hall, you have a staff member that's wearing a cap, a baseball cap. Nobody's saying nothing about that. Right. So there's some hypocrisy there, you know, in some of these laws and policies.
I mean, but again, that these hypocrisies are symptomatic again of this is why I go back to the institutional part, right? It's symptomatic of the logics that come with saying that, you know, we have this very like militant policing kind of ideology about what needs to happen in school, a very colonial approach to saying this is punishable, right? That very logic is dehumanizing. Which is why it doesn't, it's like tinkering with the policies is not going to matter much if we don't transform the logic that says humans we don't need to assume that there is something punishable about what somebody's wearing. That doesn't even make any sense, right? But that's just how that makes sense in a colonial context. That makes sense in prison. And that's why we've taken that kind of mindset and we've applied it to schools, right? And so, and we got to think about that. What is it that we believe that we need to transform radically if we're ever going to have true freedom, Black and brown children in particular?
No, and that's something that we all have to ponder, especially as we go through this struggle to try to change the way that we do things in education, especially as it pertains to our Black and brown students. Now, I want to give you a chance to talk to us about Black Appetite White Food.
Yeah.
So the title, when I first saw the title, initially I was like, But then as I read the first 10 to 15 pages, I got it.
Mm.
And, I don't want to give my interpretation of it. I want to give you a chance to just tell us what inspired you to write the book in the first place. And for those who have not purchased a copy of a book or are not familiar with it, just let them know what's the meaning behind the title.
Well, I'm a poet, so I'm not going to give you the whole thing away.
Of course not.
I love for people to grapple with meaning. And I believe that meaning is made not just from what is intended by the author, but what the reader brings to the text, right? And so we're constructing meaning together, me as the author and you as the reader. The book was very much inspired by the very experiences that I shared earlier, right? I'm living this like, I love Black people. It's not even like the way I love Black people don't even make any sense, right? Black people are amazing. Like we are creatures on the planet. And to live a life of just knowing and feeling and experiencing how amazing we are, the kind of mindset that I think a lot of people have when we talk about racial justice is like, like we're trying to get a seat at the table. Like we're trying to get a seat at the table of whiteness. Like, no. How about by nature of the way that we've constructed our reality, this world is being truly robbed of the brilliance and beauty of Blackness and all forms of diversity for that matter. But I'm just like on fire about being Black. Like I just love it. And so there's this appetite, this hunger, this craving that comes with what we want, like what we are, what we know we already value, how we already exist powerfully in the world. But then it's like contrasted with the mainstream discourse and realities of whiteness that inundate our realities every day. Right? Like I constantly have to code switch or switch in and out. I have to do all of this in order to cater to a reality that is not my own. And so Black Appetite White Food is about that tension. It's about that tension. And it also is very much inspired by Fanon's Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask. When I first encountered that work, I was like, it just named something that I didn't even know how to name, And so Black Appetite White Food is about the fact that we are very aware of how amazing we are. Here, hence the appetite. And so is the world, right? Like we move and shape culture, right? So the appetite is there, the hunger is there, all of it is there. But then here we are still with a global obsession with this paradox of whiteness that's juxtaposed with anti-Blackness. So we can't understand white supremacy without understanding the way that anti-Blackness plays against it, right? And so that tension is what I'm trying to explore in the book.
No, absolutely. And because you don't want to give away, the whole book, and I totally understand that, because I want people to buy the book. And I know some of the people in the audience have bought the copy of a book, and I think one person said it just got in the mail and they can't wait to dive in.
Nice.
But when I saw the title, and if you don't mind, I just want to share my interpretation of it.
Yeah, do your thing.
Yeah. So when I saw Black Appetite, and just after reading it, I just kept thinking about the fact that even in 2020, we're still hungry for liberation. We're hungry for revolution, right?
Yes.
We're still hungry for all that. But at the same time, we keep consuming. This is where the white food part comes in. We're consuming Eurocentric ideals. We're consuming these, in the process. So there's this disconnect that's still happening. And I'm still guilty of it to this day. I'm still guilty of it. Like, even if when I walk around a predominantly white neighborhood, I feel like I'm obligated to say hi so that they don't feel like I'm going to do something to them. Like, people passing me by.
Right.
I have to feel obligated to do that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's just so much going on there. But this is a book that you all need to buy. Please get it. I know it's been sold out in other book distributing stores, so I know there's some new copies coming in. So yeah, please make sure you all get that.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to be clear, like, when I say I don't want to give it away, it's not like I don't want to give it away so you buy the book. It's not that. It's that I'm a poet, right? And so as a poet, I really want for people to make meaning. So it's kind of like, a magician don't give away the secret to their magic trick kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's almost like when something is created, I prefer for people to grapple and think about how it sits with them in real time. And when you return to it over and over, when I return to the meaning of it, it shifts over time. So I would hate to give one static meaning and say, this is it, because it's just not that rigid, and what you just shared is brilliant and really on point. So thank you.
No, thank you for even giving me the chance to even process it in that way.
Yeah.
But now I want to shift gears to hip hop and just let you know I'm like a certified hip hop head. Grew up on the culture. So I'm an 80s baby. So I grew up on, Jungle Brothers. I grew up on, Public Enemy, Native Tongues. So that was what my brother and I were listening to. So, I'm from Connecticut. So we don't have like our own culture. We pretty much gravitate towards all the cultures, right?
Okay.
East Coast, Southern rap, doesn't matter.
Right.
Now, in recent years, we've seen a lot of hip hop culture infused in education circles through different initiatives, whether it's hip hop ed, whether it's apps like Vocabulary and other tools, and even just TikTok videos that teachers are using where there's that hip hop influence, which is in some cases borderline appropriation, but that's another. And in some cases, actual appropriation, but that's another conversation for another day.
That's real talk.
Right. But I want to know from you, what are your thoughts on the evolution of hip hop culture within the concept of education, thinking about where it was at one time and where it is now?
So there's a couple of things. One, I'm all for what it means, again, for the cultural practices that come from our communities to be centered and celebrated and affirmed and sustained on their own 2 feet, right? So not like, oh, I'm gonna teach you this hip hop so I could really teach you what, this white old author that you really need to learn, but I'm gonna teach you the hip hop so I could bait you in, reel you in, and then we're gonna learn this other thing, right? So I really value the fact that hip hop education and other movements are talking about the way that this is an intellectual terrain that is valid and valued and has the complex cognitive skills and intellectualism that we desire to develop in schooling and education. It's all there, and it's worthy of exploration, and it's worthy of engagement. So I really appreciate that, and that the way that continues to go. However, we don't necessarily, our cultural practices don't need the validation of dominant institution in order to be valuable, right? So I appreciate the way that people are fleshing out the work. I know historically, hip hop and any and everything that comes from Black and brown cultures is looked at as something that is highly problematic and not worthy of being, like it's like the antithesis of what we want to value in schools. And so I appreciate the way that people have advocated for and changed that kind of mindset. And there's just like a lot more work for us to do, right? Because again, that work is only possible when our institutions are able to truly value what comes out of our communities beyond the standards of what is constantly being imposed. Now, the reason that it teeters on appropriation so often is because in real life, in everyday real life outside of school, hip hop has the most mass appeal. It's like right? Yeah. Like global mass appeal. How do you dispute that? Right? This is why what we standardize in school doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't even reflect what it means to actually be prepared for the real world. In the real world, hip hop cultural practices have major influence. Even if you care so much about economic success and all of that, all of the indicators point towards our world valuing hip hop in mass. So the fact that we don't value it, the way that we police it in school is just tethered to the way, again, that we police bodies. We police the cultures, the standards, and norms, and the values in schools based on how we police bodies in this country. It's racialized, right? Yeah. And so for me, of course, I'm very excited about the fact that we are doing this work. It's just, I know we got a lot more work to do, right? Like we're doing the work of forwarding this and making sure young people understand what needs to happen. But for me, there's another step that needs to happen, right? Like I don't want to just see how math and science and English and social studies can be understood through hip hop. I want to see how hip hop informs those disciplines. How can the cultural practices, the histories, and the ethos of hip hop transform how we even conceptualize history, or how we conceptualize science, or how we conceptualize any of these subject matters, right? Because then it's not just a one-way street. It's not just I'm using this as a way to get you to acquire this content. It's that this is a whole entire different way of knowing and engaging with this content and transforming this content. So I think we have more work to do so that it's not just we're not fetishizing it.
Right. And I think it goes back to what we said earlier about the importance of affirming the brilliance of our students, our Black and brown students, as it pertains to language, because the way we even disseminate information is done in a hip hop way. And not in the sense of, oh, I have to put together some bars and rap it to my students. It's more about, okay, instead of saying it in a more traditional way, if I say it in this way, using their lingo, they're able to process it and understand it differently. And I think that just speaks to or reinforces the idea that we're just not monolithic people. You go to different parts of the world. If I go to, for instance, in Philly, where I used to teach, they have their own lingo. If I go to Boston here, they have their own lingo. And it's still Black people, Latinx people. They're sharing their own, they have their own language.
But that's what I'm saying though, about us not just fetishizing what hip hop is, but using the whole cultural mindset of it and thinking about how it transforms, like schooling, for example, right? Because in hip hop culture, like hip hop, right, movement and knowing, like if you're not hit, if you don't know, if you're not on it, if you don't know what's hot, if you don't know what's heat, if you don't know what's going on right now, then you outside of the culture, right? That puts that mindset will change, like you said, across time and space. So if I'm in Philly, I gotta be hip to the language of Philly in order to be culturally connected or to engage in meaningful exchange with Black and brown folks in Philly. And if I'm in Cali, it's different. If I'm in Brooklyn, it's different. That's ideologically opposed to standardized testing, right? It don't even makes sense. So it in the whole logic of it, in what we value and celebrate in our culture, is this constant movement. It's this constant reshaping and reimagining of who we are and switching it up. Like that whole mindset directly pushes against the way that schooling is standardized. And so of course it will connect with young people differently, because it's the way of knowing and being that happens in our communities that we're usually not exposed to in schools. And so that's what I want to see more of, like how that changes the game. It changes the game if the teacher is now required to be hip to the socio the sociolinguistics, right? What is the context right here, right? Imagine that. Imagine if you had to pay attention and be situated in the community and understand the language of this community in order to really understand the heart and values of the people in this community as a part of the educational process. That's hip hop. Because you can't just go to anybody community and then just be you speaking the way you speak without being called out, like not in a negative way, but saying, oh, you from over here? Okay. And then there's this like rich tapestry, right? So I love us. I'm obsessed with us. So totally, yes.
No, yes. And we're going to keep this hip hop conversation going into the lightning round. So
okay, I'm scared now.
The energy, keep it light. You already received the questions, so you already know I'm about to ask you. And yes, you're from Brooklyn.
Yes.
A lot of great MCs from Brooklyn. So I want to ask you this. Who are your top 5 MCs from Brooklyn? Now you can do top 5 or you can do your favorite 5, whichever one works for you.
From Brooklyn in particular?
Brooklyn, yes.
Ooh, child. I don't have top 5 MCs from Brooklyn. Nah, it gotta be national. It gotta be national.
All right, we'll remix it. Let's remix it then. All right, do national.
I in my heart of hearts, I always gotta start with Lauryn. Like like Lauryn changed my life. Lauryn Hill changed my life. Like really. And I just can't deny, the love there. Of course, Biggie and Pac. There's a impact there. Of course, there's just so many people. But I know it's like really hard to. I know, and these have been going around, right? Just like, oh, the top 20 MCs and all of that, but Rod Digger, and for sure, and I just love Rhapsody, like just totally love Rhapsody, and so I can't keep it in Brooklyn in particular. I actually love Jay-Z for Jay-Z's more recent work. And I have so many complications with him and who he is that I can't fully delve into that without teetering. I mean, and with all of them too, like Biggie and Pac, like there's so many complications. But definitely Rod Digger, Rhapsody, Lauryn. I love Black women.
Yeah, and shout out to Rod Digger, Brick City in the building, right?
Yeah.
People forget how ill she was on the mic.
Yeah.
Rod Digger, especially during the flip mode years with Busta Rhymes and that whole crew. So shout out to her. I know she's doing her thing with Lord Jamar and on their podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, very underrated MC.
Yeah.
So I know you've been doing a lot to try to take care of your students during these tough times, but I want to know, what's your self-care activity? What's kept you sane? Your favorite self-care activity?
Oh, first of all, I stay prayed up. So, my favorite and most urgent self-care activity is my abiding and enduring relationship with God and staying grounded in that. And that happens through meditation and prayer, and also just like being mindful of who and what has access to me, right? Like setting those kind of boundaries. And I mean that in terms of media, social media, like how do you, I'm constantly reflecting on how do I remain clear on what it means for me to be a vessel for the work that I feel divinely ordered to do, and then what needs to be attracted and fall away from me in order for me to actually do that work well. That's a part of what my everyday like meditation and prayer practice entails. That's my self-care work.
All right, awesome. Now, you're on an island. Okay. And you only have 2 albums to listen to on this island.
Oh, Lord.
What would those 2 albums be?
I don't want nobody to kill me. People judge you. You know, like that's the thing. Don't judge me. Nobody don't.
No judgment zone here.
Wait, 2?
All right, you know what? I'll give you 3. Let's do 3. I'll remix it for you again.
Okay, I appreciate you.
All right, no problem.
So Miseducation. You see? Miseducation. This sucks, but Lemonade and 444.
Okay. So like, yeah, Lauren, Beyonce, Jay-Z.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a good 3 albums.
I could defend, like I'm from Brooklyn, like I could defend myself, you know, like we could talk about it. Just for folks out there, we could talk about it. I have my reasons.
You're not gonna get any dispute from me. Those are 3 great albums.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong with any of those. A book that every educator should read, other than yours, of course.
Ooh. A book that every educator should read. Read everything that Toni Morrison ever wrote. Please read every single thing that Toni Morrison ever wrote. And I hope that doesn't sound overly cliche for you folks. I hope that's like, I hope you have been doing that. And I'm like, oh, we know that already, because that means that you've been doing the work. Read every single thing that Toni Morrison ever wrote, especially Beloved. Beloved is my favorite book.
Oh, that's a classic. That's a classic.
It's transformative. So yes.
Okay, so have Melissa in the audience saying I should answer a question. Okay. I will answer a question. I'm trying to be gracious to our guests, so I'll answer a question. As far as albums. Okay. See, now I'll do albums.
Okay.
And then, yeah, this is tough, but I'm gonna go with Most Def. Well, Yasin Bey, like on both sides.
Okay.
I throw Brooklyn Brother up in there. It's one of my favorite albums.
Yes.
I will also throw in, because I'm a Tribe fan, I gotta throw in Midnight Marauders.
Okay.
Actually, either that or Low End Theory, 1 or 2. You know what? I'm gonna stick with Midnight Marauders. And I need to throw a sister in there.
Don't be throwing a sister, like let her step up.
No, I'm saving the best for last. Saving the best for last.
I got you.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm about to go with Lauryn Hill. You know, Miseducation. That Miseducation album. Like you just can't go wrong with that.
You can't.
But I have too many honorable mentions. Too many.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
All right. Last question. Nets or Knicks?
Nets. That was easy.
I gotta make sure.
The Brooklyn Nets. Like this, you see this right here? Listen, you talking about I got a nameplate that say Brooklyn on it, okay?
Okay.
The Brooklyn Nets. That's how hard I ride for Brooklyn.
All right. I gotta make sure, because for years they were up in New Jersey.
Yeah. Those are the lost years.
All right.
Brooklyn Nets. And the Knicks, I mean, I don't claim them. I'm sorry.
Nobody's playing them these days. Trust me. You're not gonna
they done got Spike Man and everything. I'm like, oh God. Yeah.
Yes, but Dr. J, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so deeply. This is the work. This is nourishing in a time that's wild. So.
No, absolutely. But before you leave, if you could just share your social media information, how can people connect with you and support the work you're doing? for the
Yeah.
community?
Yes. So Jamila _Lyiscott, that's JAMILA_LYISCOTT on Instagram and Twitter. And JamilaLyiscott.com is where you can find some of my media coverage, videos, resources, all that good stuff. So yes, looking forward to building with everyone.
All right, Dr. Jamila Lyiscott, thank you so much for being on the show. And we're going to continue to stay blessed up, and we wish you a good night, and just keep doing what you're doing. You know,
Thank you so much.
you got stands out here.
Oh, that means the world. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to crossing paths again.
Yes. All right. Have a good night.
Good night. Bye.
So thank you everybody for tuning in to another episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and all streaming platforms. You can also check us out on YouTube as well if you want to check out the video versions of these episodes. And then finally, for people who want to connect with me on social media, you can check me out on Instagram at Quam_the_identity_shaper, at Twitter at Identity Shaper, as well as Facebook. So I'm active pretty much in every platform. So if you want to connect with me and continue to build, let's connect. And that's it for tonight. So for everybody listening out here, we'll wish you a good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, people. Have a great day.